The wind carried laughter down Main Street that day, sharp, metallic laughter that scraped against the sunburned walls of Dry Creek. At the center of that sound stood Clara May Holt, a widow of 32, barefoot in a dress that had once been cream, but now looked the color of regret. The hem was torn, the fabric mended with uneven stitches her own hand, clumsy but honest. She stood by the general store porch, clutching a small paper parcel of sewing needles she'd traded eggs for. They called her the witch's widow, not because she'd ever cursed anyone, but because her husband, Eli Holt, had died in a fire that no one saw start, and the rumor was that she'd struck the match herself. The preacher's wife had sworn she saw Clara with soot on her hands the next morning. That was enough. In a town where talk traveled faster than horses, Clara had been condemned without a trial, just the slow death of isolation. Now she lived in the old smokehouse, beyond the cottonwood trees, a half-mile from town, where the wind carried voices, but no kindness. That morning, she'd come for thread. The stairs met her before her boots hit the steps. The women at the store door leaned close, their whispers clinking like silver spoons against enamel mugs. "She still wears his ring," one hissed. "Like she's proud of what she did," said another. Clara's hand tightened on the needles until the paper tore. She turned to leave, but the laughter caught her light and cruel as tumbleweed. Behind her, a man spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Hey, witch," he said lazily, "you patching up another coffin?" Clara didn't answer. She walked away slow, the way you walk when you refuse to run. Dust rose around her ankles, like smoke from the past. From the saloon balcony, a man watched boots crossed, hat shadowing his eyes. His name was Silas Boone, and he had seen too many hangings to laugh at this one without a rope. He'd ridden cattle for half his life, buried a wife in the other half, and now drifted between towns with money enough to drink and guilt enough to keep him sober. He didn't know Clara May Holt, but he recognized the look on her face, the look of someone who'd been burned once and was still smoldering. When she passed under his balcony, the sun caught on the broken silver clasp of her shawl. Something in it, the small defiance of still wearing beauty when the world said she shouldn't, made him set down his glass. That was the moment it began. Not the love, not yet. The noticing. And noticing, in a place like Dry Creek, was dangerous. As Clara disappeared down the road, the saloon door creaked, and a voice drawled. "You looking at the widow again, Boone? Don't waste your pity." "That woman's bad luck in a dress." Silas didn't look at him. He just said quietly, "I've seen worse luck in better dresses." The man laughed, but the sound didn't last long. Because later that evening, when the bell rang out across Dry Creek, not for a wedding or a fire, but for a punishment, every eye turned to the edge of town where Clara stood beneath the elm tree, her hands bound. A sign hanging around her neck that read, "Thief." And Silas Boone, from the crowd, didn't move. Not yet. He just watched. The rope was there, coiled on the ground like a waiting snake. The sky broke before the crowd did. A low rumble rolled over the valley thunder, thick as a drumbeat, the kind that makes even guilty men flinch. Clara stood in the center of town, her wrists bound with rough hemp that smelled of old sweat and horses. The wooden sign, THIEF, swung against her chest, its corners scraping skin. She had stolen nothing unless dignity counted. "Should have known she'd start stealing," said Deputy Marin, grinning through a mouth half full of missing teeth. "Once you burn your husband, what's a few coins?" She didn't answer. She had learned silence was safer than truth. Beside the general store, the women stood beneath their bonnets like vultures with ribbons. The preacher's wife whispered something that made the others titter behind gloved hands. A child tugged at her skirt. "Mama, what'd she take?" "Hush," the woman hissed. "The Lord sees." The Lord might have seen, but he wasn't speaking. Silas Boone leaned against a hitching post, rain starting to wet the brim of his hat. His fingers brushed the Colt on his belt, not for threat but for memory. The last time he'd seen a rope like that, It had been around his brother's neck, a hanging that never been proven right or wrong. He couldn't watch it again. "Who's making the charge?" Silas asked, voice steady as a saw blade. Deputy Marin smirked. "She was caught behind the saloon with old Mrs. Calhoun's purse. Said she was returning it. Funny, ain't it, how thieves always got good reasons." Clara spoke then. Quiet, but clear. "The purse was dropped. I brought it back." A gust of wind lifted her hair, strands sticking to her cheek like black ribbon. Silas looked at her, then at the crowd. "Anyone see her take it?" No one answered. The silence was thicker than the rain now. He stepped forward. "Then let's not hang a woman for being poor." Deputy Marin spat near his boot. "Ain't your concern, Boone. You ain't sheriff here." "Maybe not," Silas said, "but I still got eyes." He reached down, lifted the sign from Clara's neck, and held it up. The paint bled in the rain, black letters running down like tears. "Doesn't seem right," he said softly, "to make the rain do the weepin' for us." The crowd stirred. A murmur rose, not agreement yet, just confusion. But then came the small sound that cracked it open. Not thunder, not gunfire. A child's voice. "She fixed my mama's coat for free," said the girl, no older than 7, stepping out from behind a wagon wheel. "Mama said only good folks do that." The girl's mother tried to pull her back, but it was too late. The spell was broken. One of the older men shifted his weight, embarrassed now. The preacher coughed. Deputy Marin cursed under his breath. "Y'all got soft hearts. She'll steal again." Silas didn't reply. He just took his knife and cut the rope at Clara's wrists. The fibers snapped with a soft, almost holy sound. He dropped the knife, stepped back, and said, "If she steals again, I'll pay the price myself." For a long time, no one spoke. Then the bell that had called them all there creaked once, empty, and went still. By nightfall, the rain came in sheets. The town scattered to porches and hearths, muttering. Clara walked toward the edge of town, the rope still coiled in her hand. She could have dropped it, but she didn't. Not yet. Silas followed her halfway, stopping, where the road bent toward the cottonwoods. "You shouldn't stay alone out there," he said. She turned, the wet hem of her dress dragging in the mud. "I've been alone longer than you think. You'll be alone longer still if you keep looking him in the eye like that." Something flickered in her, not fear, not defiance, recognition. "Maybe I'm tired of bowing to ghosts," he almost smiled. "Ghosts got more manners than this town." Then, quietly, she said, "Why did you stop them?" He looked at the rope still dangling from her hand. "Because I don't like watching the same story twice." The thunder moved farther east. The rain softened. Clara looked at the rope, the symbol of her shame, the town's judgment, her survival. Then she tossed it into a puddle. The water swallowed it whole. That night, lightning split the hills, and somewhere between the echo of thunder and the whisper of wind, a new rumor began, one that said the widow of Dry Creek had a man stand for her, a dangerous rumor, the kind that could burn a town twice. By morning, the town pretended nothing had happened. That was Dry Creek's way: bury a sin by breakfast, dig it up again by supper. But word travels faster than conscience. When Clara stepped into town 2 days later, people stopped what they were doing, not because she was bound or broken, but because she was walking free. The widow had no shame left for them to steal. The dress was still shabby, yes, but she'd washed it in creek water till it smelled of mint and iron. Her hair, unbraided, fell over her shoulders like a black banner. Not neat, not defiant, just alive. Silas Boone watched from outside, the smithy. Arms folded, a streak of coal across his sleeve. He'd been helping old Jonah mend wagon axles, not for pay, just for the rhythm of work. The sound of hammer on iron steadied a man. When Clara passed, he tipped his hat. She hesitated, then nodded back. That was all. No words, just the fragile bridge between two outcasts. Behind her, a door opened. The general store owner, Mr. Dobbins. "You ain't welcome here, Clara Holt," he called, voice sharp as cut glass. "Not after the trouble you brought." Clara stopped, turned. "You mean the truth?" he sneered. "Mean the kind of truth that ruins business." Silas set down the hammer. "Leave her be, Dobbins. This ain't your town, Boone." "Then it won't matter if I burn it," Silas said evenly. The air went tight as wire. No one moved for a long time. Then Clara spoke soft, like a thread stitching the air back together. "I didn't come to fight. I came for fabric." Dobbins spat. "Then you best pray the Lord weaves you some mercy." She walked away, head high, the sound of her boots, small but certain. That night, the wind turned cold and mean. Smoke rolled down from the north, ridged the smell of dry cedar and panic. Silas was the first to see the fire. He ran toward the cottonwoods where Clara's smokehouse stood, his horse pounding mud and sparks. By the time he reached it, the roof was half gone, flames biting at the walls like wolves. "Clara!" he shouted. She was inside, coughing, dragging a wooden chest toward the door. He grabbed her by the arm, pulling her into the rain-soaked dirt. "What in hell are you doing?" he roared. "It's all I have left," she said, gasping. "Eli's ledger, my mother's shawl." The roof groaned, split, and collapsed. Firelight leapt up like a scream. They stood watching it die. Her past, her proofs, her small piece of safety. When it was over, all that remained was ash and the faint smell of apples. Silas took off his coat, draped it around her shoulders. "Someone lit it," he said. "You know that, don't you?" Clara nodded. Her face was wet, not from tears, but from rain and smoke. "They want me gone. Then we don't give 'em the pleasure." She looked at him, eyes rimmed red. "We?" He shrugged. "I've been worse company." She almost smiled. Almost. Then she bent, reached into the ash, and pulled out something half-buried. A burnt rope, blackened, and still smoking at the ends. The same rope that had once bound her wrists. She held it up, trembling. "Let 'em see what's left of their judgment." Silas stared at the charred coil, the way it curled like a dead snake. "You keep that," he said. "One day, you'll know what to do with it." When dawn broke, smoke still hung over the ridge. The town woke to a different silence, not gossip this time, but guilt. Because fire, in a place that dry, always says what no preacher will. And Silas Boone, standing beside the widow in the ashes, felt something stir inside him. Not pity, not desire, recognition. Two burned things that refused to stay buried. That afternoon, he hitched his horse outside her new shelter, a lean-to by the old orchard. "I'll help you build again," he said simply. Clara looked up from where she sat, her hands raw from sifting through soot. "Why?" He leaned on the post. "Because I've seen a rope before. And I don't like where it leads." She nodded, wordless, and together they began hammering scraps of wood, patching canvas, rebuilding something halfway between a home and a prayer. When dusk came, they sat by a small fire, neither speaking. Clara took the charred rope, wound it once around her wrist, then dropped it into the flames. It burned quick and quiet, releasing a thin gray smoke that rose straight into the stars. Silas watched. "You sure?" She said softly, "If I keep it, they win. If I burn it, I do." He nodded, his face caught between firelight and shadow. And for the first time, she smiled. Small, but real. The kind of smile that comes after the gallows. The wind changed the next morning, not the kind that cools your face, but the kind that claws through towns like it's collecting debts. By noon, a dust storm rolled in from the Badlands, swallowing fences, horses, and sound alike. People bolted their doors and prayed under their breath. Only two figures stayed out, one man, one woman, hammering boards against the wind at the edge of town. Silas Boone had his back to the storm, shoulders broad as the barn wall he shielded. Clara stood beside him, her dress flapping like a tattered flag. They worked fast, tying canvas to the rafters, shouting over the roar. "Why is it every time we build, something tries to burn or blow it down?" Silas yelled. Clara's voice came back through the wind. "Because things worth keeping don't come gentle." The storm laughed in their faces, but they kept on. When the worst of it hit, they dove inside the half-built shelter walls, trembling, the clan's roof moaning like a wounded beast. Clara pressed her back to the boards, breathing hard. Her palms were bleeding from splinters. Silas tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve and wrapped her hand. "You'll scar," he muttered. She looked at him. "So will you." He met her eyes, and for a second, they weren't widow and wanderer, outcast and drifter. They were just two souls who'd both buried too much. Outside, the storm howled like judgment. Inside, silence heavy, but human. When it passed, Dry Creek looked peeled, raw windows shattered, fences stripped, signs gone. Even the preacher's cross had blown sideways, but Clara's little shack still stood, barely. And that was enough. Silas rode into town that afternoon, dust caked to his boots, coat torn. The townsfolk stared like he'd risen from a grave. Dobbins called from the porch, "Boone, you see what happens when you shelter sinners? The Lord's wind don't forgive." Silas stopped, turned his horse slow. "You sure it was the Lord, Dobbins?" he said. "'Cause it spared her house, not yours." People laughed nervously, unsure whether to cross themselves or spit. Then, out of the saloon, came the preacher's wife, bonnet gone, hair streaked gray with dust. She held up something torn and fluttering, a dress or what used to be one. It was Clara's old shabby gown, the one she'd hung to dry before the storm hit. The wind had ripped it off and thrown it through town. Now it hung from her hand like a flag of disgrace. "She'll take any sign to town if it means shame," someone muttered. Clara heard them. She had followed Silas into town to find supplies, and now stood there face streaked with dust, eyes quiet. The preacher's wife lifted the ragged dress. "A woman who tempts storms invites ruin. She should learn humility." Clara stepped forward. Her voice came soft, but carried through the wind-cut silence. "I wore this when my husband died. I wore it when you all called me witch. I wore it when the fire took my home. You call it shame?" She reached out, took the dress from the woman's hand, and shook off the dust. "It's proof I survived." And before anyone could speak, she tore the dress in half right down the seam and threw the pieces into the air. The wind caught them, carried them down the street like pale birds. No one laughed this time. Even the preacher lowered his eyes. Silas stood behind her, jaw tight, saying nothing. But in that quiet moment, something changed. The town that had watched her burn now watched her stand. A boy, maybe 10, face smudged with dirt, stepped forward and picked up one of the torn scraps. He brushed it clean and held it out to her. "Ma'am," he said, "you dropped this." Clara smiled, slow. "No, son, I let it go." That night, the wind stilled completely. The stars came out small, stubborn lights against the black. Silas and Clara sat outside the rebuilt shack, the earth still warm from the day's fury. He poured 2 tin cups of coffee, rough and bitter. "She made you a spectacle," he said. "She gave me a stage," Clara answered. He smiled, faint. "And what'll you do with it?" "Start again," she said. "Only this time I'll sell something worth wearing." "Like what?" "Dignity." She looked out toward town, where a few lights still burned. "I'll open a place for women like me, ones who've been spat on, burned out, blamed. I'll make beauty from what they called shame." Silas studied her in the firelight the way her face had turned from fragile to fierce, not by luck, but by choosing to stay. "Then I reckon I know just the man who'll help you get it started," he said quietly. The next morning, before the sun had burned the frost off the fence rails, Silas Boone rode to the nearest bank, 30 miles east, in a town that didn't know his past. He returned 3 days later with papers in hand and a glint in his eye. When Silas Boone returned to Dry Creek, the town didn't know what to do with him. He wasn't just the drifter anymore, he was the man who stood for the widow. And he was richer than anyone had guessed. Rumor said he'd once owned half a silver claim in Abilene and sold it after his wife died. Truth was, he hadn't touched a dollar since until Clara May Holt gave him a reason to spend one. He rode in at sunrise, leading a wagon stacked with lumber, fabric bolts, glass panes, and one old sewing machine, polished, oiled, and gleaming in the morning light. Children followed the wagon like it was a parade. The adults just watched, tight-lipped, pretending not to be curious. Clara stood on her porch, apron dusted with flour, her eyes widening at the sight. What in heaven's name? He stopped the wagon, jumped down, and held out a crumpled deed. Not heaven, he said, just a little justice. She took the paper. It read, Property of C.M. Holt Dry Creek Boutique and Dressmaker's House. Clara stared at it, words catching in her throat. You bought me a store? He scratched the back of his neck. Couldn't stand seeing you fixin' torn sleeves in the dirt. Town needs a place for honest work, and you're about the only honest thing left in it. Her voice went thin, trembling between disbelief and something deeper. They'll hate it. He smiled. Just a flicker. Then they'll have to look at it every day. By noon, they were building. The townsfolk gathered across the street, whispering. The preacher's wife said it was indecent. Mr. Dobbins called it foolish. But the boy who'd picked up Clara's torn dress scrap ran to fetch nails. And when Silas's hammer started ringing through the morning, no one could ignore the sound clang, clang, clang like judgment turned to rhythm. Clara worked beside him, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back with a strip of the very dress they'd mocked. Her fingers, once shaking, moved with purpose. She arranged the fabrics by color, faded rose, worn blue, humble white. Each swatch had been saved from some ruined dress she'd mended for free. By evening, the first sign went up, hand-painted in rough strokes. The widow's stitch. Below it, she'd added in smaller letters, Beauty from what survives. The next day, she opened the door and waited. No one came. The street was quiet except for the creak of the saloon sign and the far cry of a crow. Then, just before noon, an old native woman came stooped, wrapped in faded beads. She held out a torn blanket and a coin. Clara smiled, took it gently, and said, Pay me next harvest. The woman nodded. When she left, she was wearing a patched shawl, so fine it shimmered in the dust. By evening, 2 more. Women came the preacher's daughter and a farmhand's wife. They spoke little, eyes lowered, but they came. And Dry Creek began to shift, inch by inch, the way mountains erode quietly, irreversibly. But not everyone wanted change. That night, someone nailed a branding iron to her door. The shape of a crooked W. Witch, widow, worthless. When she found it at dawn, the iron was still warm. Silas was already there, leaning on the rail, jaw set. They're scared, he said. Fear's got mean hands. Clara looked at the iron, her symbol of shame made in steel. She didn't flinch. Help me heat the forge, she said. He frowned. You gonna burn their sign? No, she said. I'm gonna change it. They worked in silence, stoking the fire until it glowed red. Clara lifted the brand with tongs, turned it, hammered it against the anvil, once, twice, 3 times, until the crooked W straightened, into a clean, proud M. She quenched it in water, steam hissing like a spirit set free. Then she carried it out to the porch, pressed it gently into a strip of leather, and nailed that leather above her doorway. M for May, M for Maker, M for Mercy. The townsfolk saw it that morning, glinting in the sun. Some crossed the street rather than pass beneath it. Others nodded, quietly, unsure why they did. Silas watched from the shade, arms crossed. "That'll hold," he said. Clara smiled faintly. "So will I." When night came, a single lamp burned inside the widow's stitch. Through the window, Silas saw her bent over her sewing table, the glow soft on her face. He stepped closer, but didn't go in. Some things didn't need saving anymore. And yet, deep down, he knew what Dry Creek didn't. That sometimes the richest man is the one who gives something back to the burned. The next day, a sign appeared under hers, carved in simple block letters, "Owned and built by S. Boone." For the first time, the town saw two names side by side, a widow's and a cowboy's, and couldn't decide which one to whisper first. Autumn crept over Dry Creek, slow and golden, softening the edges of everything that had once been cruel. The dust storms stilled, the saloon quieted, and in the middle of town, the widow's stitch stood like a candle that refused to go out. Every morning, Clara May Holt opened her shop windows, dusted the sill, and set out a pot of wildflowers, sunburned daisies she grew herself by the old cottonwoods where her house once burned. Women came now without shame. The preacher's wife bought lace. The miner's daughters came for ribbons. Even Mr. Dobbin's niece brought her wedding dress to be hemmed. No one spoke of witchcraft anymore. No one spoke of theft. They just called her Miss Holt, or Clara, or, in softer tones, the woman who stayed, Silas Boone, kept to his quiet ways, half partner, half shadow. He worked the land behind her shop, turned an old corral into a small ranch, raised 3 horses and a garden that somehow bloomed even through drought. Some said he slept there now. Some said they were married. Clara never confirmed either way. All she'd ever say was, he built what others tried to break. One evening, as the sun folded itself behind the hills, a wagon rattled into town driven by Deputy Marin, the same man who'd once tied her wrists. He stopped outside the boutique, spat into the dirt, and walked in. The bell above the door trembled. Silas was outside chopping wood. He froze at the sound. Inside, Marin leaned against the counter. "Heard you do good business now," he said. Clara didn't look up from her sewing. "Good enough. Seems Dry Creek forgot what you are." She met his eyes, then calm, unflinching. "No, they just remembered what they were." He laughed, mean and low. "You think you can wash a name clean with ribbon and thread?" Clara set down the needle. "You can't wash blood, but you can stop it from spreading." For a second, something in his face flickered, not shame, not mercy, just the slow awareness that his power meant nothing here anymore. He looked around the shop at the shelves of cloth, the gold light on the walls, the soft hum of a world that had rebuilt itself without him. "You keep that sign up," he said, nodding toward the door. "You keep reminding folks what you are." Clara walked past him, pushed open the door, and pointed. "You mean this sign?" The iron M caught the last of the sunset, glowing red like a live ember. Marin squinted. "Wasn't it a W once?" "It was," she said, "but people change when they learn how." He didn't answer, just turned, spat again, and climbed onto his wagon. The wheels groaned away down the road until only the crickets spoke. When Silas came in, Clara was standing in the doorway, watching the horizon fade to blue. "He come to stir up ghosts?" he asked. She nodded. "But ghosts don't stay where they're not fed." He smiled faintly, leaned his axe against the wall. "You ever think you'd come this far?" She laughed a quiet, low sound, like a fire catching kindling. "No, I only thought about surviving." He looked at her hands, calloused and scarred, from rope, needle, and work. "And now?" "Now," she said, brushing dust from her apron, "I make things that last." Weeks later, the first snow fell thin and hesitant, like it didn't trust the ground yet. Clara walked outside, wrapped in a shawl stitched from scraps of every woman's dress she'd mended that year. Each patch told a story: loss, labor, healing. She stopped by the garden fence where a single green shoot still pushed through the frost. A wildflower, stubborn as breath. Silas joined her, coat unbuttoned, hair silvering at the edges. "Funny thing," he said. "Storms burn down everything but what's real." She touched the flower lightly. "Maybe storms just teach us what to keep." He looked at her, not as savior, not as widow, but as something whole. "You reckon folks'll remember all this someday?" "Maybe not by name," she said, "but by what they feel when they see a woman stand up straight." As the snow deepened, she went back inside, leaving a small lantern glowing in the window, a steady flame against the cold. From the street, you could see the shadow of her hand moving at the sewing table, the rhythm patient and sure. The iron M above the doorway gleamed even in the dark, faint, scarred, eternal. A mark once meant for shame, now shining like a promise. And in the hush of that small, forgotten town, they said if you passed the widow's stitch on a winter night, you could still hear the faint sound of thread pulling through fabric, and a woman's voice whispering, not bitter, but strong. The world breaks what it fears, but some of us learn to make beauty from the ruins. If this story moved, you tap that subscribe button and join our campfire. We share real Western folktales of mercy, grit, and quiet survival stories that remind us that even in dust and silence, the human heart still mends what's broken. Subscribe now and ride with us through the untold West.